So thank you all for joining us. Once again, as we did in the morning, if in case it's not too much trouble, just for our panelists' benefit, if you might want to just drop in to the chat feature any key points or issues, and also for me, that you would really like to get out of this discussion. And also just for the panelists' benefit, kind of what intrigued you about this virtual fly-in and the session, and what you're looking for when it comes to careers in Washington. And I think that might help them better understand who's in the room. So thank you for joining us this session. As we've prepped our panelists, we have a good 40 plus students and recent grads. I did want to open with a quote that we often hear, the business of America is business. But my crackerjack researching skills last night found that although that quote is attributed to President Calvin Coolidge, it's actually a misquote. And the actual quote, which I think relates even more to our session, is, "After all, the chief business of the American people is business. They are profoundly concerned with producing, buying, selling, investing, and prospering in the world." So there's a bit of a global edge to that quote. We are joined today by two great friends of FIU that have been connected to us for a good amount of time, and their teams for sure. Lourdes Diaz-Hurtado of Dell, Governmental Affairs, and Guillermo Areas of BMW. Both brands we've heard much about, and I'm sure have a presence in many of our homes. I will let them give a broader brushstroke of their own introductions. Let me lay out what I think, and I hope, and I'll look at your chat comments now too, but what I think the mission for today is to better understand the role of corporate governmental relations teams in DC, both on domestic issues that impact international business, and how these corporations also interact with players and global organizations in Washington. In a practical sense, I think most of you on the line, on Zoom, are looking forward for skills and experiences and ideas on how these shops are looking for to recruit new talent. And of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic, so at some point, I think we will delve into kind of how both corporations have the pandemic has affected what they're advocating for, and how they're approaching government. So why don't I pitch it off to our two panelists. We'll start with Lourdes Diaz-Hurtado. Bit of background on her. Attended Montgomery College and University of Maryland, a master's at GW, has had experience as a legal assistant at UT Austin, as well as at the State Department, and currently at Dell. As we open up, why don't you give us a bit of an understanding of what your corporation's role in Washington, D.C. is, but you personally, how what that means for you, and how you got there. So Lourdes.
Sure. Yeah, like you mentioned, I got my master's at GW. So I'm actually from the DC area. So I'm not necessarily a transplant as most people from DC are. I'm born and raised in Maryland. So I actually started off my master's at GW and landed at Dell shortly before I graduated. And really what I've been doing at Dell is a couple of different things that kind of encompass what government affairs is, or what that definition and how it evolves. So we primarily focus on policy advocacy, and that includes anything connecting really policy and thought leadership as well, and then bringing in the business enablement function. You mentioned, what the U.S. is doing business, and that's their business, and that's essentially what we try to do at Government Affairs, is really connect that portion of the business at Dell, but also tie in strategically the policy advocacy and thought leadership of Dell.
Okay, thank you. Guillermo Areas is head of government relations for and external affairs for Latin America and the Caribbean at BMW Group. previous experience at Bayer, DHL, proud grad of Miami-Dade College and the Florida International University, as well as an MBA from Thunderbird. So Guillermo, a little bit more about BMW's role in Washington, how you personally got there, to kick it off.
Yes, my role within BMW, I am the head of Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm in charge of the government relations, the lobbying from Mexico all the way to Argentina, with the exception of Brazil. I have a colleague that handles Brazil. My role here in Washington, D.C. Entails quite a bit of traveling, which I haven't done in the last few months. So essentially, I'm on the road about 50% of the time. If I could summarize what I do, is I protect the interests of BMW Group. In a nutshell, I make sure that our company's revenues, our sales, our assets, that we don't pay, that not one more penny is taken out of our pocket than it has to. So I protect the bottom line from new taxes. I protect the bottom line from regulations that could adversely affect our results, and also doing political risk analysis and monitoring, so I can provide my colleagues on the business units with, I call it an early warning system, or where I'm seeing some signs of trouble, and making sure we take the appropriate actions to avoid any losses of capital. And how did I get here? I've been working for many years with German companies. As you mentioned, Carlos, I started out of Thunderbird with Bayer, a German pharmaceutical, then with DHL, which is also German in logistics. And it is just easier for an individual being hired into the German company culture than someone who hasn't. It's also easier for the company to work with you. It's a very demanding environment, but at the same time, it's very rewarding, because there's still that old mentality of that social pact that companies have with employee, sort of what used to be called lifetime employment. If you give to the company gives back to you. It's a very demanding, the way German companies work. Everything's very systematic, but you get used to it. And I'll give you an anecdote. An American friend of mine who was hired for the first time with BMW, he was telling me, these people never thank you for anything. They never tell you good job or anything. I said, what are you talking about? This is what you're getting paid for. It's a German company. Nobody's going to tell you good job, pat in the back. That's just the way it is. So it's a bit of a different culture. Yes, that's it from my side.
A good anecdote. So I'm curious for both teams, nuts and bolts of the actual, when you look at the landscape of the federal government, what are we talking about? What specific issue areas or are we tackling? Are we talking trade and tariffs, immigration issues, taxes? What takes up, if you were to break down some of these large or big issues, sum it up in ballpark? Why don't we start with Dell?
Sure. You mentioned trade and tariffs, and I think that was something that was very much a focus earlier on, but really with the pandemic kind of highlighted that a little bit more, and it also highlighted supply chain. So, with this global economy that we have, we have factories, and I'm sure BMW does as well, all over the world. So different governments are going to have different restrictions related to the pandemic, or otherwise. Previously it was the trade war with China. Brexit was happening. So really kind of trying to focus on the supply chain of those things. And with the pandemic, that shifted a little bit and really was in crisis management, I would say. But that's one of the things I think that Dell focuses on in terms of advocacy. So supply chain would be one, trade and tariffs. And then, on the other side, or the other side of the coin, are things that are social impact issues. So Michael Dell was a small business owner. He was an entrepreneur. So small business and entrepreneurship is really close to his heart, and really one of the main things that we focus on and we advocate on. So we have a whole small business unit. I've been personally tracking for Dell small business funding that's coming through in the US, also small business funding that's coming out across the world in terms of stimulus funding. So that's something that we track. And another social impact issue that we've been looking at as well is the diversity inclusion in tech, and really the skills gap and how we can work with state and local governments of filling in that skills gap, whether it's older workers who need to be reskilled and updated and shift careers, and how Dell can be kind of a conduit in doing that as well. So it's just doing it at not only at the congressional level, I would say, but it's also thinking about it at the state and local level. And working with people on the Hill, but also making sure that message is coming across, you know, if it's related to STEM education, then through the K through 12 system, and also in university and higher ed. It's really kind of runs the gamut, because you can really focus on any of those things, you know, and I think that's the great thing about Dell. It's not just trade and tariffs, it's not just going to Congress and advocating on that as well, but we do a lot of community initiatives. So it could be that you're working in your local community. You know, I know Guillermo mentioned that we travel, and that's something that we do a lot. We've been traveling around the US, particularly on the East Coast and the Southwest, and some into Mexico as well, but we do community initiatives and community events. And I know with FIU, we did a policy hack, which is one of the things that we've worked on, which is essentially bringing in students or innovators and entrepreneurs and coming up with a policy solution on a policy issue. So I know with FIU, we focused on the environment and rising tides. So that's an example of something that we do locally. So I just wanted to make sure that like students know that it's not necessarily always about being on the Hill, but it's also interacting with the local community and kind of carrying that message on from the Hill down towards state and local as well.
Yeah, and a couple nuts and bolts questions, if you know the ballpark answers here. The corporation as a whole, number of employees, size of a budget, or you know, overall income, if you will, or what are some of those? Help us understand Dell's.
Sure. So Dell is about 150,000 employees, give or take, and worldwide. And we're based all over. So I know we have facilities all over India. We have facilities in the EU, obviously also in the US. And, you know, we're headquartered out of Round Rock. So we work, and I think people think Dell and they think laptops, and which is true, we do have laptops, but we also have a IT system. So we also have companies who are under Dell Technologies, which include Pivotal Labs, who do cloud services, and along with VMware. So we work closely with them in RSA. So Dell Technologies is really kind of those companies kind of combined together to make that end-to-end IT solution.
Okay, and the governmental relations team in Washington, D.C., how many people is that?
So we're a small but mighty team. We are a team of 8 in D.C. And but we also have colleagues in Brazil, and we also have one up in Boston, and then 2 based out in Austin. But I think globally, we're about 25.
Okay, and let's see if our participants, I think you have if you figured out, our students and recent grads, how to either raise your hand or use the thumbs up. How many have actually been to FIU in Washington, D.C.? Let us know. I think most of you have not, but I do have to say Dell's governmental relations team are our neighbors. So in our physical center in Washington, Dell is just a stone's throw across the hall. And a fun fact of their office, this has to be one of the coolest features in any Washington office. They have a recreation of Michael Dell's, why don't you tell us, Lourdes?
Sure, yeah, we actually have like a mock Michael Dell's dorm room. So he started the company when he was a freshman at University of Texas in Austin. So we kind of have a replica of his dorm room and how he kind of started out. So it's a nice like nod to like where we started off. And like I mentioned, he was an entrepreneur and he was a small business, and he just literally started out of the dorm room of UT. So we have that kind of setup, which is really awesome.
Which is really cool. And for both of these teams, both BMW and Dell, for everyone to be aware of, these have been constant partners of FIU always hosting our students and always providing great advice. Not only Guillermo and Lourdes, but other folks from their team as well. So Guillermo, issues that BMW is on top of when it comes to Latin America, in your case, trade, immigration, what are we talking about?
Well, essentially in my case for Latin America, we focus our whole essence, the DNA of the company is with sustainability and environment. So for the last 7 years, I've been working on promoting legislation in the region for the facilitation of electric vehicles, electric mobility. So in the last 7 years, we have been able to propose legislation or facilitate legislation that benefits the acquisition of electric vehicles, and also advising governments or other industries in how to make sustainable production. For example, 3 years ago, we began working with Codelco, which is the Chilean copper mining entity, the largest of the world, on how to produce green, clean copper that we wanted to use for our manufacturing. That was a win-win for everyone, for the environment, for the Chileans who could sell the green copper at a higher price, and for us that we have integrated certified clean copper into our manufacturing, into our production. So that's one of the key pillars. Second, it's trade, access to market, making sure that we have open access to all the markets in the region, that free trade agreements are complied with. Also, as I mentioned, political risk analysis. Our region is probably is very volatile. Different markets. If we have a new government coming into Argentina or Colombia, is to advise our board in Germany of what risks we can expect regarding capital investments, etc. So I think those are the key pillars that what I focus the most. And of course, we also have a component of corporate social responsibility, where in the countries that we have. So we support different initiatives near the plants on education. We basically focus on education and also environmental issues. And then we are also encouraged by, the company encourages us to get involved in particular personal issues. And in my case is protection of human rights. So I get involved very much on issues that are related to human rights and how business can become part of that network that protects human rights throughout the region.
Very interesting. And Guillermo, I'm curious, in addition to the federal US government in Washington, are you engaged directly with other players in DC, and what does that look like?
Yes, I am. But since my region is Latin America and the Caribbean, I am not a registered lobbyist here in the US. We have a small office. It's about 8 people in the heart of DC. My counterpart who does federal government relations, we work very closely, for example, on trade issues between Mexico and the US, and we coordinate, but he does all the lobbying. In my case, the lobbying that I do is essentially with the embassies of Latin American countries here in Washington, whereas the ambassadors here have a lot of influence. This is the most important embassy for the Latin American countries in the world. It's always the US. So they have a direct line with the presidents, ministers in their countries. So when you talk to an ambassador, you can make sure that the message that you're sending or the ask is going to be relayed. Also with institutions like I work very closely with the World Bank, IMF, and especially the Inter-American Development Bank. Being a relatively small company compared in size with Toyota or GM, etc., I rely quite a bit. My strategy on lobbying is to get support or the muscle of organizations where we have similar interests. For example, IADB has a big division on sustainability, environmental change. So they have been key in working with me in pushing the agenda of electric mobility in the region. So I work quite a bit with those organizations and think tanks also. like a council and think tanks in Washington. Yes.
Wonderful. And I know, so Rose, you had asked, and I think we've already touched somewhat on, and we'll come back to corporate social responsibility as well. But and what about number of employees worldwide, Guillermo, and US? What is that?
Currently, worldwide, we had the last number yesterday, 126,000 worldwide. In sales, 2019, it was 124 billion euros. And we are the most efficient automotive company in the world when it comes to ratio between revenue and employees. So we do the most with the least amount of employees.
Wow. And a fun fact about South Carolina with your company?
The fun fact is that we are the biggest exporter of vehicles in the US.
Okay.
Because most of the companies in the US produce for the local market. But our plant in South Carolina, of the 500,000 that we produce annually, about 50% stays in the local market, and 250,000 are exported all over the world, from China to Europe to Latin America, Middle East. So we are the biggest revenue maker in exports for the US in vehicles.
And that factory you were mentioning earlier is the largest of all of
in the world. It's the largest in the world, yes.
Look at that. Amazing.
Yes.
German company and all. We've had two questions, one from Sabrina and one of her colleagues. The nuts and bolts of what a typical day may look like in your office. I know the answer is going to be, there's not one typical day, because that's my answer, but some example of the types of activities that you and your colleagues may be undertaking. Lourdes?
Sure. So what used to be a typical day, I think that's what we can frame it as, since it's not so typical anymore. I think really just kind of consists of a couple of different things. So I would say usually we have like calls throughout the beginning of the week, just team calls. And again, we collaborate internally with a lot of different business units. So we collaborate with our sales team, our federal sales team, our state and local, along with our public affairs and public policy teams as well. But then also trying to, we have meetings on the Hill as well to kind of push those narratives from the sales team and our communications team. So we also have meetings on the Hill. Sometimes we have events, I think as FIU knows, who are neighbors on our floor. We have many events in our office space as well. So I would say it varies from day to day. Now I think instead of having meetings on the Hill, we have Zoom meetings like these, and that changes as well. And I think it's really much more, I feel like I'm much more in contact now than I was when I was physically in the office in terms of like communication and keeping those lines of communication open, now more so than before, due to, you know, obviously like tracking stimulus and other things. But I would say, you know, it varies, and, you know, we travel as well. So sometimes I'm on a plane for a week and then come back, and then on a plane the week after. So it changes, but all those things kind of encompass a day.
Okay. And Guillermo?
Like a typical day is, at least the way I arrange my schedule, I try to have in the mornings conference calls with my colleagues in the different countries in Latin America to get an update on issues that we're working on. For example, it could be on Monday a call with the head of our business in Chile and discuss how the new law of energy savings law is coming along. Then on Tuesday, with the head of BMW Argentina, discuss issues in Argentina right now. How's the negotiations with the bondholders on Argentinian debt, and how default could affect our business. Colombia could be Wednesday, and if I take if I give us an example of the disturbances we're having in December, just evaluating actions of the government. In the afternoons, I tried not to have so many calls, but to do some analysis, do some reading, catching up, discussing with members of my team, where do we see some political risk developing. And of course, then there's always at least different calls every day from external actors, either from embassies, or the multilateral organizations on different topics. That's when I'm in DC. When traveling, it's just a full agenda from the day that one flies into a country, either meeting with legislators or members of cabinets, civil society. So it's a full schedule.
Okay, that's good. I'm going to pitch it over to one of our great guests, Pierina Anton, who herself, by the way, for everyone's benefit, interned in a corporate office. And I know, Pierina, you had a specific Latin America question, but maybe also before that, if you can tell the group what your previous experience was, just so everyone's aware of that.
Sure, thanks, Carlos. Well, like you mentioned, my name is Pierina. I'm an upcoming senior studying international relations and economics at FIU with a regional focus in Latin American development. Last summer, I interned with United Technologies Corporation in their government relations unit. So I was, constantly on the Hill advocating for increased funding and specific language for the company's products in aviation aerospace. UTC manufactures the spacesuit for NASA. And so last summer was the 50th anniversary of the spacewalk. And so I was up there on the Hill advocating with the director of government relations for UTC. So it was a really fascinating experience and kind of opened my eyes to the world of lobbying and how important it really is for businesses in the United States and abroad. So thank you guys both so much for this discussion. Guillermo, I had a question specifically relating to Latin America. The World Bank announced a few weeks ago that the region was planning on facing, decreased GDP growth of about 4% for 2020. So, and this has been going on even before the COVID-19 pandemic. So I wanted to ask you, how has BMW responded to that, and what plans do they have to continue encouraging capital investment in the region to kind of stimulate that growth and make sure that the organization's policy objectives are being fulfilled?
Okay, sure. As of today, we have 3 plants in the region. We have 1 plant in Mexico, which is the most modern plant worldwide. It just opened last year. And we have 2 plants in Brazil. Right now, all of them are shut down. But the investment plans, once we recover from COVID-19, are to business as usual. We expect a lower demand after the pandemic in the region. Nevertheless, we are being somewhat optimistic. We see that by some countries, by the 4th quarter of this year, picking up economic activity, and some by 2nd quarter of 2021. Our vision is very much long-term. Whenever we make investment decisions, plans, we know that there always can be some roadblocks or problems along the way, but our plans are always made long-term. So if we see an economic downturn, we are not fly-by capital. It's just the investment decisions we made are well thought out. And once we make the decision to go in, it's for the long term. So that's and then we've been seeing some positive, hearing some positive signals and messages from, for example, the International Monetary Fund, that there would be special drawing rights for countries to being able to get more capital. And also something that I've been hearing more and more is a moratorium on debt payment by countries in the region to allow them to have a faster recovery. And it looks like the IMF will be supportive of that.
Okay. And fun fact to prove that many of our office operations are connected by a minimal number of degrees, Irina, your supervisor, is one of Lourdes, is married to.
I was going to ask, I was like, did you work with Cindy?
Yes, I did.
That's awesome.
So, and that was a great experience. We had a great question here, and it touches on a word Lourdes has already mentioned, which is narrative. Alex Martinez Rivera, do you wish to chime in and ask your question? Not, I can for you, but.
Yes, I can hear you, Carlos. Sure, I'm looking for it here. Yes, I do have actually 3 questions. It's just that I was writing it while I was hearing all the panels. The first actual question will be for any of the panelists. What has been the department's biggest challenge prior to COVID-19, and how were your departments able to communicate that across the different local and state and national governments to get government collaboration or intervention?
So Lourdes, I know you already used the term narrative, and to jump off of Alex's question, you know, advocacy and lobbying and whether you're registered or not, Guillermo, I'm curious, how do you effectively communicate and what is your message? Any tips there?
Sure. So I think a little bit on, I mentioned narrative, and it's really kind of marrying the company's mission and what they're focused on. So I know I mentioned policy advocacy and thought leadership earlier. So really what that means is making sure that our elected officials know what Dell's priorities are. And like I mentioned earlier, it can ebb and flow with, there were issues on the border late last year with the US and Mexico border, and we have a facility in Mexico. So in that case, it was trying to let them know that, that point and that trade point was important to us. But because we had already previously worked in New Mexico, creating kind of community events and policy hacks and really engaging with that community, we already had that narrative in place of what was important to Dell. And we're not in there to just, obviously we're there to, have the products and be as a service to the state and local, but also to invest in those communities. And we did that through various initiatives there. So in this case, when we had that issue, when we went on the Hill, we were able to communicate effectively, and they already knew who we were. So that is always just a plus. And we had many touch points with them prior to this, so they were able to identify and kind of be able to advocate on our behalf and be able to reallocate resources to help us continue to have products shipped over from Mexico to the US.
Okay. Guillermo, any thoughts on communication and narrative?
Yes, I would say one of the biggest challenges 5 or 6 years ago, back 2013, 14, launching electric vehicles and hybrids all over the region. I remember stepping into government officials' offices, advocating for legislation in favor of electric vehicles. They essentially thought that I had just landed from Mars or from Saturn, and just, electric vehicles. So when did BMW start making golf carts? No, they're not golf carts. So the biggest challenge was educating, and a lot of the work, and Lourdes can tell you this, is educate people in general, educate legislators, decision makers, in a way that is easily understood. In this case was the benefits for the environment, the savings that the countries would have in having less upper respiratory diseases in the big cities, for example, in Bogota, in Santiago, in Lima, and sometimes do the numbers, because the numbers are very important. Say, look, even if we're going to have a tax break for the next 5 years on eliminating luxury taxes on electric vehicles, but in the long run, you will have investment in electric stations for vehicles. Will have new technology, and you will have also other types of benefits, health benefits for your population, that when you quantify them, more and more than surpassed whatever fiscal revenue was not being received by the central governments.
Okay.
So you have to do your homework. It's very important.
Do your homework. That's important.
Yes.
100%. So both Lazaro and Jennifer Puentes have touched on technology, and we're just a quick follow-up to Guillermo. What about autonomous self-driving technology? In addition to electric vehicles, is BMW playing much in that space, and does that filter into your work with the region?
Yes, we are, and we have a whole compound in Munich at our headquarters just for autonomous mobility. It's a big part of the future for a company. In the Latin American region, it is not something that I am actively lobbying because it's barely beginning in Europe and the US. What I'm doing though is, for example, is helping our company get some of the prototypes of autonomous vehicles to go through customs in Colombia, Chile, Argentina, etc., because they have very different specs that are not in the books in any of the countries. And these are the cars that are taking videos of the main roads, etc., so they can go into a database, and eventually when the cars go in, they have already big sections of cities of the country mapped out. But yes, we are very much involved in what is autonomous driving. It's one of the pillars. We have three. We call it ACES, which is the future for BMW's ACES. It's autonomous vehicles connected to the whole Internet of Things. Electric for E, and S for shared. Shared mobility is very important for us. In the next 20 years, we will be selling less cars than we sell today because there will be more shared vehicles. But revenue from shared vehicles will more than triple the revenue we have now just selling cars the old way. So the industry is changing.
Okay. Several of our questions touch on social responsibility, and you both have already touched on some, but Jose Ignacio Grados Hernandez, do you want to maybe represent some of your colleagues and ask a question?
Yes, sure. Hello, my name is Jose Ignacio Grados. I'm from Peru, actually. So Guillermo's area is very relevant to me, in Latin America specifically. So basically, my question was touching upon when it comes to social responsibility and partnering, how would you say corporations react to this aura or this public misunderstanding of corporations going for the bottom line and the idea of only responding to the interests of, let's say, board members and investors? How do you think governmental relations can address this sort of misconception with the public?
I'm sorry, a question for Lourdes, please.
Sure. No, I was going to say either one of us can answer. I think kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, I think at the end of the day, businesses are always going to sell things, but it's not just that, right? So you want to be able to create a relationship with that community, whether it's at the public sector or private sector, or partnering with other people in your industry like Intel and Microsoft in our case. But it's really tying in what corporate social responsibility and what our pillars are. So an example for Dell, we have social impact goals, which one of them is actually advancing sustainability, cultivating inclusion, diversity and inclusion in the workforce. So by going off of those kind of goals that we have and that the company sets for itself, you have opportunities to partner with different people and different communities there, and you actually are better able to serve them, because if you know your customer and you know your client, you know what they're looking for. And it's not, I don't think it is like it, the business has changed, that it's not just like, here's this product, look how cool it is, you can buy it. It's more like, it might not be a right fit for you. And I think it's really companies' responsibility to kind of look into, say, does this meet their need? And if it doesn't, we may have something else that might be a better fit. So it's really kind of marrying those two of like the social corporate responsibility and obviously continuing to be a business and create that connection.
Sure thing. Yes. Thank you very much for your answer.
Yes, and in our case, very similar. Our philosophy is that where we operate, where we do business, where we have customers, we're there for the long run. So we're interested in economic development. We're interested in education. We're interested in health. So the more thriving a society is, the better for our business. So we are tied in together. To give you an example, we had a great decade from 2003 to 2013, where our commodity prices were very high in Latin America. Many governments were very smart in investing in their populations, and we saw millions of Latin Americans coming out of poverty into the middle class in Chile, in Brazil, in Colombia, Peru. And these are people who have now a higher disposable income. They can buy computers, they can buy laptops, they can buy pay for college education for their kids. It's a virtuous cycle, and obviously they can also purchase vehicles. And we have seen a big surge of highly mobile, upper and middle class in Latin America, and we saw the effect of those government policies of pulling the population from lower to middle upper class on our sales results. It's just it's a direct correlation.
Okay. Now, Guillermo, you had already mentioned human rights, and I know Kaylin Diaz. Kaylin, in case you wanted to go ahead and follow up with your question, I know you were curious about the company and company's position there.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, Kaylin.
Hi. I was just wondering, since you mentioned that you were very passionate about human rights and incorporating that into your corporation, I just wanted to know what human rights it is that you address and how it is that you do that, in what ways your company does that so that you can advocate for them.
Yes. Okay. BMW Group has a sister organization, that's the BMW Foundation. And one of the areas in which the BMW Foundation works is in the protection of human rights. And we're talking, say, human rights. It's having inclusion, avoiding or fighting against discrimination. Also, in the case of Colombia, as a company and with the German government, highly supportive on obtaining funds for the Colombian government to cover the cost during the peace process. Also, I work very closely with the Auschwitz Foundation on the protection of human rights and prevention of genocide. And it's a network of members of the Auschwitz Institute that I provide workshops for my colleagues who work on the field. Say if there's a mass atrocity or there are human rights violations, one of the first rules a company has to have is to be a witness. Be a witness and protect your employees. Being a witness is to record, document, because at some point in time, there will be an international court that will take to justice the perpetrators of genocide. And it's important, everyone as a citizen has the responsibility in business, like citizens, that we also have this responsibility to record, observe, and document. So that's an example of what we do.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to lean on Andres Eskenazi. Several of our questions and one of the most obvious questions of these last few months and the years to follow with a hot issue. Andres, do you want to chime in now?
Yes, thank you. First, I just wanted to thank you for being here and dedicating your time for all of us, especially during this time. And my question is basically, how are you addressing on a daily basis this public-private relationship, and how the current COVID-19 pandemic is influencing or shaping policy making and and how corporations like Dell and BMW are approaching this topic with lobby and other type of strategies. And what is your opinion on that, and what is the biggest challenge about it?
Sure. So a little bit about that was, I think, and this is a little bit more on the US based side, is really trying to communicate with legislators about, in our case, it's IT and IT as a service, and how it is an essential business, especially when we had a lot of work from home. Then people who didn't work from home needed a laptop, and how we were able to transition and help those companies and those, and in this case, it was K through 12. There's, teachers are now teaching through Zoom now, so they need a laptop and they need that hardware. So for us, it was really focusing at the state level and at the federal level, is saying that we are an essential business. And I think this kind of also ties into an importance of trade associations. So we work with DC trade associations, and in particular, we work with TechNet a lot, where we have other industry partners who also are facing the same challenges and also have customers who have the similar needs. So really working through trade associations is a strength, where you can kind of have a strength in numbers, if you can say it that way, and where we can pose to legislators and saying, this is an essential business, this is a need that our customers need, and also your constituents, because these are K through 12 teachers. This is also includes your state and local as well. So it really is kind of using the different tools in your toolkit as an advocate. And in this case, we leaned a lot on our trade associations to be able to communicate that message, and to say, other people in the industry, this is also a concern for them as well.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Coronavirus.
Sure. In our case, COVID-19, just do a quick summary of how the progression of how we tackled the situation. First of all, was obviously internal to make sure that we protect our employees, that we protect their health, that we protect their source of income, their employment. And having said that, to take cost cutting measures to protect our liquidity, making sure that we have enough cash in hand, that we have enough assets, to making sure that our business is sustainable and that we'll be in business after the pandemic, and all of our employees can stay with the company. And also and thirdly, but not last, is customers, making sure that our customers, even within the pandemic, as much as possible, can receive our support if needed. Then another thing that, as we went a couple more weeks, is something that's very important in our job, is to ask. Sometimes we don't go asking for something in particular, but this time with the pandemic has been to ask government officials, what can we do as BMW, and I'm sure Lourdes, you do the same, what can we do to support our local governments? What can we do to support central governments? And some things we're able to do, some not. For example, in Chile, we provided vehicles to private and public hospitals, so people wouldn't get bunched up in front of the hospitals for testing, but so doctors could go into neighborhoods and do the testing in remote places. So that's very important, to ask how you can help, and to be in tune.
I'm curious for both corporations, the practical, and Guillermo, we're very familiar about one of your programs because you're constantly reminding us that we need great FIU applicants. But for both corporations, any on-ramps for internship programs or entry-level employment? What's out there that this group might, that should be aware of?
Sure. So we have an internship and university recruiting team that we work with, and they recruit from various universities. So we have it through, and it's a rotational program. I think it's about 18 months. So you have different experiences through different business units. I think this is business related focus. So I think you do it with business development, the sales team, finance, accounting. So you get really an idea of what Dell does from the business side. And then we also do an internship in the summer with the Fund for American Studies. So we work with them as well in terms of doing it directly with government affairs. I would say that that would be the route. But if you're thinking of just having something a little bit more catch-all, then I would say do the rotational program. But in the summer internship, you don't have to be necessarily like a government affairs person. I think last year we had somebody who was computer science, and the year before that we had somebody who was majoring in accounting. So don't feel like what your area of study limits you. But those are the two ones that I know of. But I'm happy to share with you, Carlos, after the call, any links or any information about other programs as well.
That'd be wonderful. And Guillermo?
Yes, likewise. In our case, we have a well set up program for internships in all branches of the business, from manufacturing to business to marketing to government relations. You can find that in the BMW of North America webpage, and to go through the process of application. As an FIU graduate, be more than happy if you're applying for a position of interest. Ask Carlos to give you my information, shoot me an email. It might take me a couple of days to reply. And if I see that there's a match, and I'd be more than happy to recommend you to promote FIU graduates within BMW. And also, at this point in time, we cancel, obviously, all internships for the summer. We continue hiring for certain key positions for recent graduates. But as I said, we're very optimistic that by the last quarter of this year, and certainly 2021, maybe not back to normal, but we'll be on our way to the numbers or figures that we used to have last year.
Okay. And both Victoria and also Krista have touched on your asking guidance and advice on what individuals at their stage in their career as a student, what are steps that folks should be taking if they want to break into advocacy and governmental relations and lobbying, fields of study. I know those, you've already touched on that, Lourdes, that those can come from all over the map, but any practical advice for someone either just out of the gate or soon to be out of the gate to get into the world of governmental relations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different routes I think you can take in terms of what you prefer. I would say there's the policy analysis side of it, and really policy heavy. So obviously DC, there's a lot of policy wonks. So there's people who do analytics and create reports and all that. And we use those as resources for us. So if you're leaning towards that, I would say definitely focus on your research skills, your writing skills. And also, like Guillermo mentioned earlier, when you're dealing with legislators, you have to be able to take complex issues and be able to make it into a digestible format for someone who has no idea what you're talking about. So especially with tech, I think sometimes these are complex issues and we need to be able to say it in 2 to 3 sentences max and be able to get our point across. So I think those are one of the skills that I would definitely focus on. And then another one too, in terms of networking, as you guys saw earlier, somebody worked, interned at UTC and, they somehow have a connection to me. DC is a very small town. So I think you can always find someone and find another connection. The degrees of separation are very small. So I think is always the power of networking, and, the person that might know 3 other people that can help you find, the position that you want or the internship that you're looking for. So I would say you could also, in terms of networking, do that. And especially in this time, you might not be able to physically, when you're in DC, meet someone for a coffee, but, there are a lot of people out there that will respond to a LinkedIn message and say, hey, this is, can I just have an informational interview, 10, 15 minutes, and take your chances that way. And I personally have done that when I was in graduate school and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was just really, you'd be surprised at how many people actually respond back to you and say, yes, I will take 10 minutes to talk to you about this if you're really interested in it. So I would say, from that networking aspect, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody via LinkedIn.
Yeah. Guillermo?
Yes. I will have to start to say that there's really no set career path for someone who wants to go into government affairs. I've spoken to hundreds of colleagues throughout my career, and just different ways that you get there. For example, in my case, I came from the business side, managing business units, divisions, and then at some point in my career, 8 years ago, I decided to go into this side of the business. I went into the dark side. So so you can either begin your career when you're just fresh out of college and work your way through. You can, like Lourdes was saying, you can specialize in a specific industry or topic, or a particular geographic region. But two things for me that are very important is whenever you do government affairs, your internal clients are key. They're important. For example, when I talk with the CEO for Latin America and the Caribbean, this person has three things in his mind, and the same things that I had when I used to run business units. I need to make sure I meet my sales quota every month, every quarter. I need to make sure that my profits, it doesn't matter if I sell gazillions of dollars, but if I'm not making the profit that the company demands, they're gonna kick me out. And also I have to contain my costs. So anything I can do as a lobbyist for the head of the business unit so he can increase his sales, making sure that not one penny is taken out of his pocket in additional taxes or regulations, protecting his profit, and also making sure that his costs don't go up because there's a new regulation in customs that will delay the unloading of cars for a week in Ecuador. And I managed to eliminate that. That's this production of cost. That's very important to make sure what, as a government relations professional, is put yourself in the shoes of your internal clients so they can see a value. A lot of times in other companies, not in our case, they think that all we do is go to cocktail parties and just talk to people, have fun. No, it's and also and then the second suggestion or recommendation that I would do: find a niche for yourself. In my case, I specialized in finance during my MBA. I enjoy numbers very much, so the niche within the company as the head of Latin America, that I have other colleagues who have other strengths, but my strength is heavy strength in macroeconomic analysis and financial analysis. So I use that to project myself and sell myself within the company. So find a niche, something that you like, something that you're good, and something that can differentiate you from other colleagues, or also within or from outside of the company.
Okay, those are both very good. And just so we're all aware, especially our guest panelists, we're going to start winding down probably another 5 minutes, if that's okay with time and stuff. And if anyone has a burning question, please go ahead and add it. I've tried to fuse as many of the previous points. I want to jump off on their last responses because, surprise, surprise, I happen to be in governmental relations. As we explained to this team, the university is active in advocating. In fusing some of your answers, we've already said, do your homework. When it comes to trying to represent a cause, a mission, an organization, I think people that you are trying to influence respect someone that's actually done their homework. And to Guillermo's last point, a lot of these roles, and I'm looking at both of you, and I'm sure it's the same in your corporation, it's very much a generalist role. You've got to know a little bit about a lot of different things. However, within that, strongly echo your thoughts, Guillermo. Go deep on one, two, whatever those issue areas might be. Sometimes that's long term. So at the university, we do, federally sponsored research, and that's our game. In addition to higher ed policy. But I've got to know a little bit I joke and say that at 11 a.m. it could be financial aid policy. At noon, It's a lunch on disaster-related research at 1. It's on graduate medical education. It's all over the map. But years back, I decided to go deep on STEM education, a lot of the federal programs that are supporting that. And sometimes it's unexpected. I know for certain that at FIU in the last 6 weeks, our team, and I take pride myself in, when it comes to the CARES Act and those sections that dealt with higher education and university support, you know, call me a geek, call me whatever, but you know, I've read every single clause there. So internally, you're seen as an asset to your colleagues. On communicating, sometimes it's as simple as this is a bat and this is a ball. Sometimes you got to break key messages down in very, very simple terms because you don't know who, you know, you are communicating with. But that's another point. If you can understand where they're coming from, as Guillermo was laying out, that's important. And just in a practical sense, and I'm sure Lourdes, with her engagements on the Hill, you know, can attest to this. Sometimes our role is meeting with key congressional staffers or agency officials, but surprise, surprise, we're not the only ones they're meeting with that day. No. They could have 15 to 20 different meetings. So a key mentor years ago taught me, be brief and be gone. So prepare for a 5-minute meeting, and if you get 10 or 15, that's success because you want to hear from them. So I do have a question, and then we'll go back to one from the room, but we've both touched on political risk analysis. It's 2020. In addition to this COVID-19, there happens to be a presidential election in the midst. I know that both corporations, or at least I know that our neighbor Dell, just like, you know, some of our the university is not active politically as a university, but many of our champions are on both sides of the aisle. To what degree does campaign politics influence your lives and your work and what the companies may do?
Sure. I think, you know, for the most part, I think as particularly in probably congressional districts, some that are coming up for re-election, we work a lot with them, especially in Texas, obviously where we're headquartered, and in Massachusetts where we have another big footprint. So really, it's just continued engagement with those representatives. And again, touch points, like you mentioned, brief, but making sure like these are the things that are important to Dell, and continuing those relationships. I think from the political side, one of my colleagues runs the Political Action Committee, so which is where we host different events. So the way that we do it, I guess, internally in terms of election and trying to keep our Dell PAC members informed is we do now virtual town halls because we usually used to do them in person, but now we do it through Zoom where we can give Dell employees the opportunity to ask questions, whether it relates to Dell as a business or if they're actually a constituent to that district. And we are a bipartisan PAC, so when we have a Democratic event, we also have a Republican event. So we try to keep that balance and to also continue to keep our Dell PAC members and Dell overall informed of what will be happening in the upcoming elections.
Okay, Guillermo?
Yes, and in my case, I will speak for the Latin American region. And from what I've seen, what my colleagues do here in the US, we, as a company, we do not provide financial support or for any candidates, or in the US or in Latin America. It's just not part of how we do the lobbying, Brussels, European style. But it's a little different. What we do is we do a very heavy stakeholder engagement with on both sides of the aisle. So I'll give you the example of Argentina. We had the Macri administration, excellent contacts, supporting them in any way we could. In Europe, for example, in the signing of the agreement, trade agreement with the EU, with the automotive industry, fine. But at the same time, I also had contacts with the opposition, with the center left that now is in government, the Fernandez government. Very, even some of them, some very good friends were on the other side of the aisle. And I think it's important to maintain a perspective and think perhaps in what benefits the nation as a whole, what benefits society as a whole, in the policies that you're lobbying for. And also something, also a critical message that I would like to convey for some of you who might be doing this type of work later on in your careers. Never promise anything that you will not be able to deliver later. You will lose your credibility, and it will cost you, if you can ever recover it, it's very hard. So be always very measured on what you can promise, what you can deliver, and always think about the first and foremost about the ethical sides of what you're doing. And if at some point you don't feel comfortable doing something, then just say, this is not the employer or the company that I want to work for. Not that it has been my case, but of cases within the industry that colleagues have had to say, no, this is not what I signed up for. Mm-hmm. So your ethics, your values, your morals is very important. That's something that you can always take with you to another company.
And I'm curious for both. Is there one achievement with your current corporation or previous stop that you're proudest of when it comes to the governmental relations and the advocacy world? Anything that, and you've both touched on many successes, but I'm just curious in the arc of your career, what are some of the projects or issues that
Sure. I think the one that I mentioned earlier is probably the first one that's top of mind for me. I think it was really when, we were advocating in New Mexico and trying to really get involved with the New Mexico State University and working with their team. And we did a policy hack, which we, engaged with women entrepreneurs, and we're really working with them as a team to develop their idea. So while we were doing that, we realized that there was an issue at the border. This is when they were shifting personnel from the border in New Mexico, where we transfer a lot of product through Mexico. So they were shifting those into another port. So because we were already engaged in New Mexico, we actually had our team physically down there. Chris Turner was actually down there, and then I was still here on the Hill, and we were able to still connect with the representative on the Hill and be able to advocate and say, this is really important for us. And again, bringing in our industry partners, and we had HP, we also had Intel as well, which was affecting them as well. And we were saying, this is really important to us. We really think that, we can advocate, we want that to be advocated and be able to move product and not wait, there's delay in shipments, like, Guillermo said, that kind of really brings it all together. And for me, it was just like, not only was it a team effort, but you really see the way that your relationships that you create and how that can work for the company, and really, make those sales makers happy, make sure that they are getting their product on time, making sure that they're meeting their quarter sales. So really that kind of brought everything together and say like, wow, that was a really good win, where we were able to make those relationships and locally, right, and have that transpire to Capitol Hill.
Okay, and Guillermo?
I think looking back at my career, it's been almost 25 years. It's building a network of not only stakeholders, but a network of friends, people who I appreciate and who also appreciate me. And being also, so I call myself a matchmaker. Some of them call me a matchmaker. If I'm speaking with Carlos and something comes up about a topic you're interested in, oh, I know so-and-so who really, really like to talk to you and make that match. And some of these matches have been very good, not only for the businesses, for also for society. So for me, something that I feel good about myself is having a network of not business acquaintances, but of friends who I appreciate and who appreciate me. And if I can help expand, build bridges within the network, that's something that I do and that I like to do.
Okay. And for our final question, Erica, from a corporate angle, you had a specific question to ask.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I wanted to thank both of you for coming out and talking to us. It really does mean a lot for all of us. I know I speak for everyone when I say that. My question is more on the corporate end. After taking financing classes and accounting classes, you do come to realize that one of the most important people that you are trying to benefit is your board of directors and your investors. So regarding with the wake of COVID-19 and the pandemic, I wanted to know what Dell and BMW have done to adjust their business initiatives in Washington, D.C. to protect the interests of their board of directors and their investors in, like, as a result of the major stock market crash in the wake of the pandemic.
Sure. I think I kind of want to echo a little bit what Guillermo said earlier and the importance of internal relationships within the company. I think if you know internally those business units well enough, you know what you need to advocate on, and it's really creating that and knowing what their bottom line is. Like, these three things are important to them. These are the three things that we're trying to help them accomplish, right? And then what we bring in, I think from the government affairs perspective, is those relationships that we have, whether it's with legislators or with industry partners as well, and being able to make those connections. And I think, it's sometimes you think of it as just you and your corporation, but I think sometimes when you reach out to others who are in a similar position, you're able to make a bigger roar, right, in what you're trying to accomplish. So I think in relation to COVID, particular for me, in particular, what I've been doing for Dell is really focusing on small business and tracking that legislation and tracking the stimulus spend on that. So what I do is I do that, analyze that information, and take that back to our small business unit teams and be able to create information and disseminate to our channel partners and our small business clients. So I think if you leverage those relationships you have internally with the company, you're able to use your skill set and advocate that at the legislative level.
And Guillermo?
Yes, like if I just to rephrase your question, what on the corporate end, what are we doing regarding investors' expectations and board? Okay, first of all, is for us is providing different scenarios into the future. Within our company, we have two functions. We are sister functions, which is government relations and strategic planning. My colleagues in strategic planning, they do a lot of the economic analysis, number crunching, invest, divest decisions, but they rely highly on us on providing what's the economic, political, social outlook in different markets. So for us, there has been, we've been in high demand. We've been in high demand for the last 6 years, beginning with Brexit, the change of administration in the US in 2016, which changed the whole political scenario here in the US. So it's what's important is to always provide your best analysis, base it on facts, and don't be afraid of making suggestions, or as long as they are based on facts, thorough analysis, because you'll find that your business is desperate, in desperate need to have at least some kind of intelligent estimate or assessment, because no one can look into the future, but to have an intelligent assessment of what different scenarios could unfold is very valuable for your investors and also for your board.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to thank Lourdes and Guillermo both. I know a good majority of you on this Zoominar will be in Washington at some point in the future, and hopefully have a chance to to thank them in person and meet them as well in Washington, D.C. So Eric, any other wrap-up thoughts for this session or homework?
Yeah, certainly. Just on a fun note, I've been reading a lot about Washington, D.C., books based in Washington, D.C., and we're going to be tweeting and sharing a lot of the books that are based in Washington, D.C. And one relevant to this session, though not a academic explainer, there's a movie version as well, Thank You for Smoking, is a nonfiction and satirical novel about corporate lobbyists, in particular some of the more controversial industries. So not to read more about what we've heard on the real side of doing it from Guillermo and Lourdes, but it's a fun read, and I just overall recommend reading books based in DC. It looks like you all are enrolled in our Canvas course for the virtual badge, so I'm going to send something this afternoon about things you can get started on, and I think I'm also going to drop a extra spot in there to drop a quick 1-sentence reflection every day to us. That'll both help you prepare for, I know at 1 p.m. tomorrow, we're going to have a chance to reflect outside of the content sessions, and that can help you think about what you might want to say there. And also, definitely early next week, we're going to have an FIU news article up about this week. So if you are dropping in some great reflections into that space, and in our session tomorrow, your name could be in our FIU news article with some student thoughts. So I look forward to continuing tomorrow.
And please, in addition to your reflection, please help us. This was the first at bat for us at the end of the first day, but please help us right off the bat. I know I speak for Eric. It's tough to stay on top of all of these questions because every question that's being asked is very well thought out and laid out. So thank you for engaging that way and putting forth the effort to think through a lot of these issues. So apologies in advance and after the fact for not being able to call on everyone, but yeah, it's good to see that you all are thinking through a lot of the questions in the right way.
And I will just say I'm sorry for Guillermo and Lourdes sitting through a logistical update, but 2 updates to tomorrow, which are both very quick. One, young professionals in foreign policies representative will join that 1 p.m. session. So I mentioned them this morning and how you can join for free, and you'll get to hear from them directly. And I know you're curious about some details on that international development session, and more are coming, but we did confirm a speaker from the U.S. Agency for International Development who will be joining us for that, among others. So it's going to be another great day tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Guillermo. Thank you, Lourdes.
No, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure joining you. And as I said, if I can be of any assistance, please, Carlos, reach out. And also a quick, not a commercial, but there's an organization in Miami, New York, and also in Washington, D.C. that's called YPA, Young Professionals of the Americas. It's part of the Council of the Americas. Great organization for you guys, gals, who are young professionals interested in the region, to meet other network, others with same interest. Look it up in the internet. I'm one of the founders of I'm not a young professional, but I founded the chapter because we didn't have one in DC, but just one in Miami and New York. We needed one in DC. But it's a great, great venue for young professionals to meet, exchange ideas, and also get involved in social issues in the region. Just want to say that. Great talking to you guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks.